my name is Colleen Thompson. I'm the director of Reframing Ministry and Insight for Living. And today I have Jeff and Alyssa with me from Hawaii.
Yes, very far. Yeah, long commute.
But many of you have probably seen Jeff through his videos on YouTube and Jeff and Alyssa doing the podcast, which you guys have just picked up this last year again.
Yes.
Which is wonderful. And what we're talking about today is Love That Lasts, a book that they just wrote, which is fabulous. And I want all of you guys to go online and get it because it is wonderful. And they can get it at lovethatlast.com.
Yeah, .co, no M at the end.
.co.
I know, it's like the, URLs run out these days, so you got to start changing them. But or Amazon, Barnes & Noble, yeah.
Anyways, we are going to talk very openly about marriage, dating, sex, and all the things that go into that because these guys have some great things to say. So thank you for being with me.
Thanks for having us. This is fun.
Yeah. I would like to know, first of all, what led you to write this book?
Do you want that one? You answered that question good. So that's all of you.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so this one, a couple different things I think of, and we didn't realize this until we started talking about the book. If you go way back, like 5 years ago, we were doing college ministry. We were just out of college freshly, like young 20s, married, and we were doing, me and a friend of mine, my friend started it, and I kind of hopped in to help kind of co-lead this college ministry that started to kind of be fruitful and have a couple hundred people on weekends and small groups and all these different things. And I think in that setting and context, we just realized the need is so big, for just like a healthy vision for every question we're getting, every, weekly meeting that someone wanted to have, every small group, whatever, was about just a relationship, because that's the season they're in. But also I think I say in the intro of the book, we firmly believe that if your relationship is healthy and flourishing, then even if your life isn't, you kind of still feel fine. And if your life is great, but your relationship isn't good and isn't flourishing, then you feel like life isn't good.
Yeah, you just say that.
There's something about where it's like the center kind of like it kind of emanates into everything else. And we were seeing that with our peers just a couple years behind us. And then once we start getting married and then kind of applying, I think, God's way for these things and really studying together, digging in, then I think we start to see the fruit come back to us and say, oh, this isn't just so that, we're obeying the rules or just so that, we might be doing the right thing, but it actually is because it leads to blessing and it leads to just more joy and more fullness. And so then then we saw that divide between our friends who weren't making that choice when they got married and just kind of doing the world's way and saying, man, we haven't been married that long, but I think we're already starting to see this trajectory difference. And so we kind of wanted to turn to those peers and friends and kind of just talk about our story and what we learned. So that's kind of the heart behind it.
Yeah.
Well, you guys come from two totally different backgrounds. And the thing, when I opened the book, and Jeff, you started out with this statement, which I think is just, I circled it, took a picture of it, and sent it to my sons. And you said, I lost my virginity when I was 16, in the backseat of a car, in a church parking lot, with a girl who wasn't my girlfriend.
Yeah, quite a way to start a book, right?
Yeah, I'm like, that's so real.
Yeah.
And then your background, of course, was no hand-holding,
no dating, I kissed dating goodbye.
Right.
Which wasn't because of my parents at all. It was just like I had read the books and I was like, no, I just want to do it this way. But then I think a lot of my decisions were based out of fear of not wanting to fall into what the culture was doing. And so it was hard for me to even have conversations with boys because I just was nervous all the time. So,
or thought you had to marry him the next day or whatever.
Yeah, or just I wonder what they think of me. Am I modest enough? Am I all these things instead of just...
Yeah, a lot of pressure and a lot of fear.
Friendships, yeah.
One of the things you guys talk about in the book, and why I started out with that, is about the whole digital culture that we have.
Yeah.
And your experience growing up as a single child with a single mom, which introduced you to pornography super early in life. Just talk to us about all that.
Yeah, I don't think we realize how much, whether it's sexual revolution in the 60s, but then, you then add on to that with the digital revolution kind of in like 90s AOL time, and then coming into it early 2000s where it's obviously just ubiquitous now and everywhere. So you have these different kind of things over decades that just continually are building on each other. And and I think it was just an interesting, I don't think we've kind of stopped, paused even the Christian church and said, man, this is having a revolution is happening in multiple regards, and I think we need to be prepared. We need to study the scriptures. How can we season ourselves, season the people, teach people? How can we live in discipleship in this way? And I think it caught us in a lot of ways off guard, and we just weren't prepared. And so,
and we're just now starting to see the fruit of
I think
the divorce culture and
totally
all of that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I think it was a mentor of mine who kind of said, sometimes it takes a whole generation for you to then kind of be able to say, yeah, that was probably the wrong choice. It takes about 30 or 40 years, of like, I would point again to the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s. I'm saying we're now finally one full generation past that, where it's like, yeah, that's very clear that turned into an epidemic that led to a lot of other worse things. And so, yeah, I think that's one thing we really need to not run from culture, never run from culture as Christians, but actually say, how can we live faithfully in culture?
Just step into it.
Totally. And technology and innovation is one of those conversations we need to be having. And how do we step into technology and innovation and the digital media and social media and live well, not just run from it?
Well, one thing that I love, if you just look up Jeff Bethke, Bethke, you'll see a bunch of topics that you've talked about online. And then also, after y'all got married and now have kids, I just love your whole Sonoma trip and how you jumped in the pool and splashed them all.
Hey, we got to keep it adventurous. So.
But you definitely talk about very real subjects. Yeah. And because I study the brain stuff anyways, what they're finding now with pornography is that it shrinks the gray matter and that it definitely affects so many different decision-making, gratification, speech and language skills, motor skills, fine motor skills, decision-making. It's an immediate gratification. It also affects dopamine and the neurotransmitters that make us feel good. So it's addictive. It's not just kind of addictive. It's physiologically addictive.
Yeah, and that's what I talk about. We have a whole chapter on porn in there, and that's what I talk about is treat it like an addiction. And that's like, especially in like people date, like in these days, like we made a video called, something about, basically the premise was, if your boyfriend is addicted to porn, you need to break up. With them. And we get so many messages every month or even if the girlfriend's addicted, that's a lesser scenario, but it happens, you need to break up. And we get so many messages of people saying, oh, that's not Jesus-filled, that's not grace-filled, that's not loving-filled. And, we can have a different conversation about the covenant of marriage, but that's still a huge act of betrayal and sin. But in dating, it's like when there's no covenant and you're literally trying to look for a spouse and something, like you don't do that with a cocaine-addicted boyfriend. Like no one has a problem saying, yes, I need to break up with him, not because I don't love him, but because I do. Right. Like he needs to go get help. Right. And you need to put them in a situation where they have no dependency on anyone else's, relational addiction to kind of that they can cope with. It's like, they need to go get help. They need to go to someone who's a professional. They need to seek, counseling. They need to go to some type of treatment center. And porn, especially once you read the research, is identical, and sometimes even worse because of the relational damage it can cause, and the distortion of sex on top of that in a relationship. And so, yeah, it's just it needs to be treated like an addiction. And when you kind of change that mind frame, I think it actually leads to a lot more healing. And then you get these guys who actually treat it like that, walk in the fullness of, okay, I need to get help, and they find it, rather than just kind of thinking that they can pray and it'll go away. Now, the Spirit is definitely the catalyst for a lot of change and healing, but I also think that God is a God who also created our brains and the neuroscience and these things. And so, yeah, I think stepping into what we know leads to a lot of help.
One of the things that you also talk about is, and I love that you just touched on that, is how many partners in a dating relationship think, oh, I can fix this. I can make it all better. And I want to say, why don't you take your crown off, because that's Jesus's anyways, and let them become more whole. Because really, addictions are showing there's holes in places where we're hurt. And one of the biggest ones in the digital generation is loneliness. And I just did a study on loneliness because we sit behind a screen thinking that we're making connections, when actually and physiologically, when we connect with our eyes, there are good things that happen in our bodies. But with loneliness, the health risks associated, depression, suicide, cardiovascular disease, and stroke, increased stress levels, decreased memory and learning, antisocial behavior, poor decision making, alcoholism, drug abuse, and eventually it could be Alzheimer's, because we know of all those. I mean, when we connect with other people in the real life, we've got to be using our whole brain to connect. Now, how was this for you going into the marriage? Explain that dynamic.
Yeah, and then talk about too. I think it's really important to talk about what she just mentioned with the think specifically the girl always sometimes thinks they can fix
Oh, I can make it better.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you have a lot to say on that. So.
Well, I don't know. I feel like within a woman's, maybe it's because women are naturally nurturing, and so then, which is a really good gift that God's given us. But then I think maybe on the flip side, it could be this lie like, oh, I'm going to nurture him, and I bet I can change him, and like he'll be different. And I think,
or if I wear this, or if I look like this,
Yeah.
or if I whatever it is.
and I do think as women we do have a lot of, I don't know what the right word is. What's that word? Like, not power, but ability to encourage our husbands or sons
In a
and
good
to
way, yeah,
infuse them with a lot of courage.
It's a sixth sense almost.
Yeah, which is a great thing. But in dating, if he is doing something that is a red flag or an addiction like porn, or he's manipulative or controlling or all these things, one, once you get married, that's not going to change. It's just going to get worse.
Really? Yeah. You mean a ring doesn't magically make everything better?
I know. We always say they're on their best, everyone is on their best behavior when they're dating. So just, if you just magnify it, and that's what, then you'll be easily able to imagine marriage.
Right. And so, but if you see those red flags, you need to end it. And it does take a lot of courage. It is a lot of like trusting in the Lord. Do you really believe he knows what's best for you? That when you give this up, he's in control. He will give you something better. All these things it's a really opportunity to have a lot of faith in the Lord. But when you do, then also you are letting them realize, like, hey, there's consequences to these actions. These aren't okay. And to really let him change. And he may not, and he might. But regardless, like, you are doing what's best for you and for him, I think.
And a lot of times specifically in the girl-guy dynamic, you're talking about the girl settles, which then enables the guy to think that it's okay.
It's okay.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Rather than,
Her silence is a permission slip.
Exactly. When I think of like what she said, ladies sometimes have a healthy power in the ability to like call men out of sin and like, no, I'm not going to stand for that. And then the men, you know, because they want the relationship specifically with people that, you know, they like or love, if they're dating or engaged or whatever, they go, oh, I'm going to lose this if I don't.
Absolutely.
And some guys make that wrong choice still, but I think it also has an ability to be a really strong, beautiful power to get guys to change.
Well, I love the point that you made in the book also, where it's a sign of self-respect, and it's also knowing in the pornography culture, we don't know who has given consent and who hasn't.
Yeah.
And I read a story of one gal who'd been whipped, like, I don't know how many times. So we don't know who's being forced to do what. But you really get to the fundamental issue is this choice going to lead to greater joy in my life and freedom and in my marriage? Or is this choice going to be binding and cut off intimacy?
Yeah. Well, and I think, and that's the lie, is that we want to try to get the benefits of sex without the vulnerability needed for the true power of sex. You know, like God created sex to be this covenantal kind of like stage play almost of like, this is actually the last step to showing what you're already doing emotionally, spiritually, mentally, of like, you know, nakedness. And it's like, you know, metaphorically, there's this nakedness in marriage of like, I see all that you are, I see your failures, your shortcomings, and I still want to be one with you. And then sex kind of becomes this. And I'm not going anywhere. Like it's, you know, nothing you can do can make me leave.
Which nothing except marriage can
have that
promise.
Exactly. And so then sex just becomes that last step of like this kind of this stage play of like showing that script. And I think, and so then when you kind of have that idea of sex, then porn just becomes like, it doesn't even make sense. You're like, oh, you literally can't do that scenario in porn because there's no one there.
Right.
Like it's a screen, you know, like that you can't be vulnerable, you can't show that, you know, take off a mask. And so it's us trying to have self-preservation, which is the opposite of vulnerability, while still trying to get the benefits. And so it's a cheapening, it's a, you know, a miswiring, a misfiring of it. And and I think that's what makes it really damaging, because then without vulnerability, you can't have intimacy.
Right.
And at the end of the day, even though guys might physically be pursuing porn for physical reasons, at the end of the day, they just want to be known. There's this level of like, you know, we go towards these things because we want to be known. We want to find intimacy. And I think it's just when you realize that it never can give that by its fundamental nature, and actually does the opposite, kind of puts you more into a hole of isolation or shame or guilt.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a total shame-based way to relate. Now, I mean, you had baggage. I mean, we all have baggage going into marriage.
I don't know about this one. She was perfect.
No, I did too.
She's pretty stellar, I gotta say.
She is.
But
I think she said, like, you know, crap once in 7th grade or something. So.
No, that's not true.
Yeah.
Oh, but you said it on the podcast the other day, and I thought, that's awesome. But you talk about in your own history anorexia and eating disorders, which is a huge struggle because of our image-based society and because of Photoshop and, you know.
Yeah.
It even plays into what the stuff I just said of the guys have created a culture of demanding something that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like, oh, a girl's going to look like the cover of a magazine.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't know that half of her entire body was just brushed
Taken
over
out.
with something.
Yeah,
Exactly.
she doesn't even look like that. Yeah.
So talk to us about that experience for you.
Yeah, well, I feel like it started when I was in high school. I was 16, and I really always longed to be married and to be dating. I was just kind of like this hopeless romantic my whole life. And come high school, there's no boyfriend, there's no guys even like interested in me, and
You were the girl that guys wanted to marry, not the
Yes.
one to bring home,
Exactly.
which
And
is how
she-
you put it in the book.
Yeah, and it's hard to have that
But in
context
high
at
school, you
16.
don't know that.
But it
You're
is
like,
true
I'm
looking
just-
back of like, yeah, that just, yeah.
No, but
guy
I had that in high
likes
school.
me.
I was
Yeah.
like the pal.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so, and I would look around at all the other girls dating, and they all were like thin and beautiful, and so I just started to believe this lie, like in order to be wanted and cherished, I needed to be a certain size, and the size kept going down as I kept feeding into this. You know, a size 8 became a 6, became a 4, became a 0, and yeah, and I just started to believe these lies, and eventually it became more of a control issue.
Sure. Which
Where-
really is what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Like whenever something in your life is uncontrollable, I couldn't control a guy wanting to pursue me or dating me. And so
But you could
the one
control
thing I could
this.
control is
Yeah.
how much I could eat. And so it really became this thing. And it wasn't like it was full blown, you know, for forever. It was just like it would go in waves. Whenever something was hard, it would get worse and on. And it went on for like 6 years. And it was really hard, and I think finally when I moved to Maui and I had women in my life, I think it was really where the Lord had brought me, for one. I was really finally the state of brokenness, like, hey, this is really hard. You feel like, you really feel like you're in this dungeon, this dark, dark dungeon, and you can't get out. And nobody understands, and even if you say something, they don't get it or they don't take it seriously, and anyway, it was just like living in hell. And finally I was at this broken spot, and I had these women in my life that were just like, hey, I noticed this in you. But they weren't just saying it. They were like, I want to walk alongside with you and heal. Like, this was my story back in high school, or, yeah, I noticed that. Like, let's just talk through it and be really real about it. And it wasn't like a 6-step program. It was just doing life and, like, coming over every day, like, just having a meal together. What does that look like? Because when you're in that deep eating disorder,
Right.
you don't eat with people because you don't want them to judge you and
Yeah,
realize
true.
that this is like a problem in my life.
And how do you let go of that control?
It was over time. It took a very long time, but I think it was just it was a one moment final surrender. Like, hey, Lord, I'm done. Like, this sucks and this is awful. I want to give this to you. I want to be completely free of this, and then being very vulnerable with a few people in your life that. Like, a
Trust,
girlfriend
and
is
they're
good, but
awesome, yeah.
also mentors that will really, like,
Older, wiser.
lead you
Yeah.
out of it and keep you accountable. And then I just feel like it was so the Lord and the Spirit just working and providing those people in my life to help heal. And then that was right about the time of my healing when I met Jeff and we started dating.
Which
It
is a
was-
totally funny story because you were crazy about her and you met her on your friend's
That's right.
refrigerator
Yeah.
door.
Yeah, that's right. Which I don't know if I put it in the book,
You
but like I
did
said,
put that in there.
Yeah, and then like I love saying they had like the classic Christian fridge too, where there was, you know, there's 7 kids they sponsored, there was the 50 missionaries that they were giving money to. So it was a busy fridge. So it wasn't an easy picture to spot. You know, there was a million pictures of this, like, you know, wholesome Christian family fridge, and so I was like, oh, who's that girl? But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
And that was when we first met.
But I remember when we started dating and finally a few months in, I just told you, like, hey, this is my story and I'm kind of in this healing journey. And I just remember Jeff being like, just grabbing my hand and saying, thank you so much for telling me that. And then you always have been so great, but just constantly telling me, you're so beautiful, it doesn't matter what size you are. And it's not that I did that for Jeff. It was just the Lord and I and my healing. But it was like the Lord gave me this sweet gift too, of like just a little glimpse of how he sees me and who I am in Jesus through Jeff and his encouraging words of my body image.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a point that we, I think, say in the book, but also make a big point to we've just seen give a lot of life to our friends and our peers is, you have the power in a marriage to speak life or death into the, not opposing party, the other person. You know,
you should have been a lawyer.
Yeah, it's like we're in
Sometimes
court.
it feels like the opposing party.
Yeah.
There's no fun fight with them.
It's like, I don't know. But yeah,
You do say that in the book.
yeah, you have the ability to speak life or death into your spouse, and it actually kind of, some way, the way I kind of almost put it, almost creates futures. Like your words create futures.
Yeah.
Not in a ex nihilo way, like that out of nothing, like we're not God, but we are in His image, and so there's this aspect of like God can speak, and then it creates something. And I think there's a level of that in humans where you speak life constantly over a person. You know, you're beautiful, you're awesome, you're beloved, you're righteous, and you say that over and over again.
You can do this, whatever.
Even though it's not true necessarily functionally, like for example,
at that moment,
yes.
they step into it, they step into it, and it becomes true. It's like you created that path, and then they step into it. And then same with like death, you know, of like you can do that same thing of like when you know those relationships that are really hard and damaging, and you know, and if you keep saying, you know, harsh, deathful words over a spouse, then they start to believe that about themselves.
Right.
And so it's a good cycle or a bad cycle depending on which one you step in. And it's cool because it tells a story about God, like you just said, of like, is it ultimately it's from Him, and He does that. Like He says, you know, you're beloved, you're mine, you're a child, you're righteous, and those things aren't like I'm not blameless, you know, we're not blameless, but He says it, you step into it, and then it actually becomes more and more true. You walk more in the light, less in sin. And I think that's such a powerful thing that a lot of marriages don't take advantage of.
When I love Tim Keller, his book, Meaning of Marriage, it's my favorite part of the whole book. He talks about how when you get married, it's like you're looking at your spouse and you're saying, I see the glorified you. Like
I see you at the finish line.
I see you at the finish line. I know you're not there yet, but I see that, and so I'm going to walk with you and encourage you to be that person, to be the best you.
Talk you into that direction.
Yeah, and so I think, and your spouse, like they know you better than anyone else, and so you have the opportunity to bring life and to encourage them to be that glorified self. More than anyone else could.
Totally.
One of the things I love is that you guys continually reiterate in so many different scenarios something that my husband and I hold true is love is a verb. It's not just a ring, and it's not just a certificate. It's a verb. And as I don't remember which chapter it was, but you said, remember where Christ ended up. On the cross. Dying.
Yeah, and that's the signal of love.
Which is, we do lay down so much of ourselves for the other person. And as my husband and I have been teaching the kids as they've grown up, I'm like, no, the grass has to get mowed this way. He's like, sweetie, we're raising children, not grass.
I know, exactly.
I'm like, well, I'm raising grass and children.
Yeah, exactly. I'm raising children that can cut grass right.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, I'm gonna speak that in his future.
Totally.
But a lot of times with children as well, it's not what we see now, but you look beyond that. And I've seen you guys do that on the videos as well with your kids.
Yeah. And I think, and even the love is a verb thing, I think the thing I think of is, you know, and again, it always bounces back up to the Lord and how He relates to us. And so it's like, which way are you living in, or what truth are you living in? And I think of the example of, like, you know, when someone asks me, like, you know, do you and Alyssa love each other? I don't go, well, yeah, of course. I signed a piece of paper 5 years ago.
Sure.
You know?
Right.
It's like, no, because I showed her yesterday. She showed me. She did
Today,
this.
maybe not, but
tomorrow.
Exactly.
Exactly. You know, she sacrificed for me here and this and that. And so it's this like constant relational action that shows the love, not, and the same with the Lord. Like when someone says, you know, if your first inkling is, if someone says, do you love the Lord? And your first inkling is to say, yes, I raised my hand 6 years ago, or yes, I went underwater 10 years ago, then that probably shows there's some serious distortion in that relationship, because you don't ever do that in an intimate relationship. You go to the moment by moment, like I talked to him yesterday, I did something, you know, like not just what you did to kind of start the relationship. And I think that kind of plays into the love as a verb or a feeling or something like that too.
Now your friend started the date night or the date thing.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So it's our friends. He had this idea, which I love.
So cool.
Especially if you're like us, you got, you know, kids, toddlers, and it's hard to get out of the house. It's literally called Date Box, and that's what it is, where they make a date for you, custom made every month, and you sign up, and it just shows up on your doorstep. And so it usually has like some food in there, some fun like activity or game you can play together, and then kind of like a content piece where you read like a devotional or you read some message they had in there, and it's fun. We love it, and stuff like that matters because we talk about that when you're married. You got to keep dating,
pursuing each other.
Yeah, pursuing each other, and pursuit is the. I think I said that a couple days ago, where, you know, that is kind of the X factor. Like we don't know, I don't know any bad marriages that say they're pursuing each other really well, And I don't know any good marriages that are saying, yeah, we're not pursuing each other at all. It's like that's kind of the thing that puts you in that place or not in that place. Is if you're constantly pursuing the other person's heart, emotions, mind, and stuff like that.
So it sounds super perfect, and it sounds ideal. And I want to know, how have you worked through some of those things that haven't been ideal?
Yeah.
Like, let's get to the nuts and bolts of this. Because those are great, but it's hard to remember that.
So let's take, I mean, she can talk about it, but I'll set it up. I mean, there's plenty.
That could be a huge setup. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm like, what are
No,
you
I mean,
gonna
there's
set
plenty.
up?
So, I mean, the first thing I think of is personality difference and how that can either totally, like the biggest lie you can believe in marriage is like, they need to be more like me and this would be better, you know?
Sure.
And that played out
Which
in
is
our marriage
like all
early.
the time you want to think that.
Yeah, played out in our marriage early and still does. And I think specifically with conflict. I mean, talk about how different we are in conflict, and that you can get in these cycles where it's like, man, we need to break this. Yeah, we need to break this and go back to a healthier way. But I think, just even the way that we like to do conflict alone shows our personality differences, which then led to some, like, we had to set a game plan and stuff like that. But
Yeah, and I mean, conflict we're still figuring out
Totally.
and working through. But if you don't know this yet, Jeff and I are very different.
we talk at the same pace. We're both loud and rambunctious.
I am so not saying a word.
Yeah, can't you tell?
So Jeff is fast-paced, like very smart, thinks through everything.
Yeah, you skipped a grade in school, pal.
Yeah, that like
I know, but then I got held back in high school because I wanted to play baseball
only
in college.
baseball.
And
There
I was,
you go.
and I was really small, and so I was like, well, I don't want to. I was 12. I was like, I don't want to be playing with these 14-year-olds. So I was like, academics or sports? Pick sports. But anyways, yeah.
And he's very fast, and so when he makes a decision, it's like, it's done. Like,
You
I
gotta
can-
decide too, then.
Yeah, once I decide it's, or like, I'm gonna decide in 5 minutes and I'm done. And I'm more,
I don't like put the foot down like that, but I have
no.
a hard time not having people at my pace of decision making. Of
yeah.
like, what do you mean you don't get it? Like, what do you mean?
Right. My
Like, I
friend
just
gets very frustrated with
I just laid out why we're doing this. Why don't yeah.
Because she doesn't want to do it.
I know that too. But yeah, so yeah, that's a bad part of me. But yeah, continue.
and I'm more of a steady, I take a while to, like, if you have an option, a decision, Jeff will think about it and decide and go. And I'm like, can we like take 2 weeks and pray about it and think about it? So sometimes
Which has to feel very quite painful.
Yeah, totally.
it's very,
Totally.
so we've had to
Yeah.
work through how to do that. But anyway, so when we get in conflict, it can be hard. And a lot of times I hate conflict. I run from it. It scares me. I didn't see a lot of it growing up. And so I'm just now learning, like, conflict is it's okay. And you need to learn to fight well, not just not to fight.
Yeah, your default was that conflict meant like fragility of the relationship.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it's fragile.
Right.
Yeah,
And I read
Yeah.
you didn't want to say anything, do anything,
No.
nothing.
And
So
I still, I mean, I'll bring up stuff, but even
Totally.
when we get in a fight now, I'm like, I'll just say whatever to be done.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
I'm done.
So there's a pouncer and a protector, and you're the
Yes.
protector and you're the pouncer.
Yes.
Got it?
And Jeff is like, conflict doesn't scare him, and he's like, I just want to finish the
it,
conversation to know
Talk
we're
about
okay.
all the points. Yeah.
Talk about all the points. So we're just learning a lot of how to communicate well, of how to fight well. What does that look like? How to communicate, how to listen to each other, how to learn that we're different and we process things different, and how to respect that in each other. And so I know that's a very broad thing in marriage, but that's a huge, whatever conflict we have throughout our marriage or hard things, that's been a huge thing of just how to learn, how to do it well.
Well, let's take. I don't think we put this example in the book. Let's take another example, a little more specific, which shows that is. So that's how we conflict. That's how we are.
And I'm
then
very sensitive.
yeah,
Let's just add that.
So
I am too,
And so
so,
this is
yeah.
our personalities and how our personalities show. But then, like, one specific example I think of is probably a couple years ago. Well, ever since we've been married, we've traveled. Like, it's just our job and whatever. We get invited places, and we want to. And it's just like my dream. I just want to go all over the world and just live out of a suitcase and do whatever, whenever, however.
Oh, this is not going to be
Eat
good.
at all the places and stay at all the hotels and all that stuff. I love it.
And the whole time he's like, "Isn't this amazing?"
Yeah, I always look
We
at him
get
like, this
paid
is.
to do this
Yeah, I was
for
like,
a
this is like
living."
this is like we're living our best life now.
Yeah.
You know? And she like gets super anxious by it, super stressed out by it, and doesn't love it. And so I mean, it's way different now. But this is more in the early. Like we both love it now, but early on it was a little
Early
more
on,
like
we
that.
traveled a lot.
Yeah,
and
and
Jeff
so-
is the type where he just gets to the airport. He's like, "I don't even know where I'm going. Just
Like I wouldn't
here's
even look
my-"
sometimes. I'm just like, I know I got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And here's our time, and we'll
How
just.
was that for you?
I'm like,
Yeah.
I need to know what to pack. I need to know like what to envision. How long are we gone?
Yeah. But
So.
all that to say, so probably about 2 years ago, then when we moved to Maui, we did have to have a conversation because then the travel from there, at least in the one-off speaking engagements, it was just brutal.
It was like, instead of 2 days, it was
I
5 days.
I had to be gone 5 days just to speak somewhere for like 2 minutes, you know, just because it takes so long to get there and
but
get
I
back.
really don't feel sorry for you.
Yeah,
You're
I
in
know.
Maui.
Exactly.
No, but seriously,
I know.
that would be huge
And then we started
exhausting.
and then we started having babies, and so then she's, you know, she just felt really alone in it. Of like, man, you're. Well, then it turned into like, okay, I'm getting anxious by this, so then just you go. But then that turned into like, okay, then you're gone 5 days. I'm alone with the kids. We're separated.
And then, I don't know, whoever is married to somebody that travels, when you do get back together, it takes like 2 or 3 days to like get in rhythm together. So then those 2 or 3 days are like, you're fighting a lot, and you're like, this is awful.
And I mean, I think every marriage has to figure out.
For me, it was very hard.
And every marriage has to figure out their own rhythms. Every marriage has to figure out their own calling and vision. But I did get to the place where basically every time that happened, I just started having this resentment's too strong of a word. It never got that bad, but just kind of like why can't she just be more like me and just hop on a plane and who cares, you know, just adventurous.
And I would get very anxious. And Jeff was like, I don't understand why you're anxious. This is such a blessing that we get to do
Yeah,
this.
like I just didn't have a ton of grace in understanding how she felt about it. I just wished she was more like me in it. And then I was talking to, we have a really close mentor couple of ours who pretty much is responsible for our marriage at this point, the health of it. And he just basically said, you know, he's like, Jeff, you know, he's like, this is one example of this. He's like, but this is also true in your marriage of other things. He's like, and you know, not all women are like this. And he goes, but my wife's like this. It sounds like Alyssa's like this. He's like, a lot of times women are gifted as almost the smoke alarm of the family, is I think the phrase he used. Yeah. And what he meant by that is he's like, you want her to be more like you, when in reality, Alyssa's gift is her sensitivity. Yeah. Alyssa's gift is that she is quicker to anxiousness. Not in a bad way, but in the like, that doesn't sound good.
Let's not jump into the deep end yet.
Yeah. And he goes, think about a smoke alarm. Like, you don't hate a smoke alarm or resent a smoke alarm. You love it because it's the first thing that tells you to get out of the house, that was a bad, you know, something's on fire. Right. And he just said, so you need to start like seeing her as that, of like, God gave you her and the family her to be like that first line of defense for the family that's going to sense things way before I do, because I'm so fast paced and don't really think about those little things. Okay. And it was just such a good example of like, he's like, man, basically it just totally changed my perspective of, instead of her needing
totally reframed it for you.
Yeah, he's like, instead of her needing to be like me, I was like, I actually need to appreciate the difference, because that makes us a fuller, more healthy family. Of like, I might call us out into adventure sometimes, and I might call us out into spontaneity, but she's also going to be the person that we need to actually listen when she says, I don't feel good about that. Because she's going to be that first person that senses a breakdown in the marriage and family before me and the kids do. And so I think now honoring that and listening to that has really transformed our marriage the last couple of years. And then all of a sudden, she realized, you know, it's in this way where I listen now, and then she doesn't pump the brakes on everything now, because she realizes, hey, if I am going to say this, Jeff's really going to listen.
We needed this. I'm like, oh, okay, like, let's do it, because it's not.
And it was something as simple as that reframing, kind of with the the hard parts of marriage, that took us like 4 years of like just doing the same circle and same merry-go-round. Then finally go, oh, I really think I need to listen to that, and it totally trained, or just see it as a gift actually, and it totally radically transformed our marriage.
One of the things that helps so much is to say, tell me more about what you are experiencing or what you're going through. Yeah. Like I need to learn about you. Yeah. And you're telling me about you, and then it's not you become like me.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, after all, you chose her, and you chose him. Yeah. And the differences are of benefit if we do learn to say, tell me more about what that experience is like for you, because I'm a different personality. Yeah.
And I think, and we learned that even, you know, just studying the scripture together of, you know, you hear the phrase image of God, and what you think of immediately is this sermon on how the individual has this beautiful image of God, and it's just this amazing, beautiful thing, and we use that to talk about, you know, abortion or other things, and which is great and amazing. But it's interesting, if you do a study on image of God, the first time it actually comes up is not in an individual, it's in a plurality. When you look at Genesis,
I love that point.
Yeah, and it's like 1:26 and 27. It says, the very first sentence, that phrase ever comes in, it says, in male and female he created them in the image of God. So it's almost as if Genesis is making this argument that male plus female is this image of God. Like there's a fuller picture. Now, of course, you can deduct from the rest of Scripture that individually we're also made in the image of God. But there's something really beautiful about that I think we realized of like, oh, God in marriage, actually, it's this divine mystery of him bringing male plus female together as one entity. And that one entity is a new image. Like we might have been two individual images, but the minute we said I do, we're now creating this new, more fuller, rounded, better picture of an image to represent God. And then when we realized that, then again, the differences started to say, oh, these are actually making us fuller. Like that I'm this way and she's this way. And if we let both of those sit here, that actually is a fuller image.
Well, and all three parts of the Trinity have very specific roles.
Yeah,
so
but they're still God.
It's a good thing that God didn't say, okay, the Holy Spirit needs to be just like this. And,
Totally.
And
exactly.
we need a Holy Spirit as a comforter, a guide, a filler of our souls.
Yeah.
You know, just when we don't have words, an intercessor.
Totally.
And then we have Christ as the model of how we are to live and think and do and be. And then, of course, God the Father. And it's so the Trinity is so complex, but when you break it down, that's very,
awesome.
very powerful.
Yeah.
You mentioned a ton, and I'm picking up the word mentors.
Yeah.
And there can't be anything more powerful than those who have gone before us and those who are coming behind us. So there's mentoring and reverse mentoring. Tell me about what that's been in your life.
Yeah. No, you talk about it. I love what you talk about when you talk about mentors and stuff.
Well, I think Jeff and I have always valued that before we were even married. And then when we got married, there's about a year where we didn't have it, and I remember just praying like, Lord, will you please bring along a mentor? And then it was just crazy story how he did, and I think it's been monumental in our marriage. I think every couple needs another couple that they know is for their marriage,
Older,
that they're not,
ahead,
they're a little farther ahead, older, but also that they're not going to take sides. Like you can't go to your best friend because they're going to be all for you.
What she's trying to say is don't make your parents the mentors.
Or your best friend,
right?
You know, like
anyone
you
who knows
need,
is just going to lean one side.
You need a
older,
couple,
wiser couple.
Yeah, that
Objective
is for
third
your
party.
marriage. And so whenever you have something that you're working through, or there's a conflict that keeps coming up and you guys can't reach a meeting point, you can go to and talk to, and they can help you work through it. And I think it's been so good for our marriage just to have a couple to ask questions for. Or the biggest things have been when we've been over at their house and stayed with them for a weekend or a week, and just seeing how do you parent, how do you discipline, how do you...
The modeling is so important.
Because it's one thing to have, like, meet at Starbucks and have them tell you everything, but then to actually see it in person, you're like, oh, that's what I want, or that's how you do that. Has been really cool. And then I think just lately, the last year or so, there have been young marrieds coming up that we've just felt called to pour into, or have over for dinner once a quarter or whatever, and just ask how you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's been really sweet for us. And it's a joy to be able to, you feel so honored when like someone entrusts what they're going on.
Yeah, and I think, and with the mentors that we specifically kind of call our closest ones are, them inviting us into their home is so much bigger, better, and different than just like, here's the answers or whatever.
Right.
And we do that in individual discipleship in the church, and then also marriage and family discipleship is we like to just give people the answers, but we don't like to invite them into our homes because that's a lot more personal and invasive.
Which is so sad. Hold on.
Totally.
That is so sad because
Totally.
like when you guys were coming, I was like, I don't know where you're staying, but if you want to come to our house, it's a Christian
Which I
place.
love that, by the way. Yeah,
come stay, but I want you to have your privacy because we don't have anything to hide.
Totally, and I think more we would serve the church better if most of us had a little bit more open door policy, because that's where these things that you can't super pin down and measure get learned. Like I was there, and I see how they parent, discipline, love. I see how their marriage is. I see how they love each other and talk to each other. Or you see the opposite, right? Like they might be amazing, and he might have all the right answers and have great theology, and then you're in their house, and you're like, dude, you're totally like rude to her every day, and like it's like you're able to live almost this double life, And so when you're really in someone's home, you get to see are they the real deal or not, and I think that also is just really beneficial.
What's also helpful is to ask the kids.
Yeah.
Because like several years ago, we were doing an interview for disabilities and sibling issues, and I said, don't talk to me, talk to my kids about it. So I had them, and I said, I'm not going to tell you what to say. You can say whatever you want to say. You can say your mom is just has no clue about these things, whatever it is.
Totally.
Because I'm not going to tell. I mean, I'm blind to some of the things that I mess up, and so by them talking, which is a good challenge. So kids, speak up.
You probably got a different perspective or learned. They did. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How can the church not promote, but really reinforce that? Because mentoring, I know in our family and then specifically for my folks, change their entire lives.
Yeah.
So how can that
Well, I
happen?
think it does need to be reinforced because I feel like
It's like we're almost losing it a little.
This, I don't know, era, we're
Yeah.
losing it, where I feel like the older mentors feel like they have nothing to offer or nobody wants them to speak into their lives, and the younger ones are like, there's no older people that
Asking
I can
me,
go
yeah.
to, or no older people that want to pursue me. So it's like there's this like, it's like two couples that are, or like two individuals that are interested in each other, but
But
need
no,
that
yeah,
meeting
yeah,
point.
Yeah.
And so I think to just encourage people like, hey, if you're younger, find a couple or find somebody that you look up to and just ask them. Just be
Yeah.
like, hey, I'd love to meet with you. Can you mentor me? Can you show me how to do this? Like, and I think they would feel so honored. And then the older generation to say, I don't know, what would you
There's
say?
value there.
Yeah, yeah. And
They've
I think
been through stuff.
totally.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's it's
You
a
always have something to offer.
It's not even just like something you should do. It's like a non-negotiable. Like, how dumb is it to not ask someone?
How do you really feel?
Yeah.
No, seriously. I mean, how ridiculous is it to not ask someone who's stepped on 40 years of landmines to tell you where the landmines are? Like, you're right. Like, that's just ludicrous for you to not do that. And so it's just so helpful and needed. And I think it's obviously the model of the scripture too. Paul and Timothy with his disciples,
Right.
Jesus with his disciples. Like, there is this relational passing down that happens to pass on truth with experience. And so, yeah, and it looks different for everyone. I think,
Yeah.
you know,
Ours live
in
5,000 miles
Kentucky,
away,
and we've
yeah.
like never lived in Kentucky, but
See, there is some great things about this.
yeah,
Just saying.
exactly. But we travel enough where we see him a couple times a year, and then I rhythmically talk to the dad every 2 weeks on the phone, and you know,
Okay.
and so like there's different ways to do it. Or so I'm a little bit more rhythmic with it, but and then we see them. But then there's also people where I know, like, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, and he's like, well, I can't commit. He's the older guy in the situation. He's like, well, I can't commit to that. I don't have time for that. And he goes, but I am mentoring, and it actually happened because the younger guy instigated it, where the younger guy recognized the busyness of the older guy and just said, hey,
Dude.
he was like, he always said, like, I want to bring you value in your work. Like, can I be your assistant? Where do you need help in your business? All these things. It had nothing to do with mentoring. He just wanted to help him at his work. And he just said, hey, let me clean up the shop, or let me do this, or let me book your flights as your assistant, whatever. He's like, whatever you need help, let me do it. And then all of a sudden they're together all day, every day. And so it's like, that was kind of the more, organic way. And he's like, there's all these different ways of just like, you can either offer a mentor value and just step into their life and say, how can I just serve you? And all of a sudden you'll be with him, and then that just happens. Or it can be like hey, can we meet? Or hey, can I come over for dinner?
Yeah, come over for dinner. Let me make you dinner.
Yeah,
all
there's
these-
just a bunch of different ways to enter into it, but you should be entering
And
into
I think
it.
too, as I'm thinking about it, I think our generation, we are having that struggle of intimacy. Like, for instance, I've always loved mentorship. I've always wanted it. But even so, I still get so nervous. I'm like, oh, she's going to know everything about me.
Yeah.
I have to be vulnerable. And I remember, like, after college, when I'd meet my mentor, I wouldn't really share the nitty-gritty stuff till like the last 5 minutes. I'm like, oh yeah, also,
Yeah,
this is
just
also
small
going
talk.
on.
I haven't talked to Jeff in 2
Totally.
days.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, but we gotta go.
Yeah.
So,
But they're like, oh, and I gotta, yeah, exactly,
yeah,
gotta go.
so just an encouragement, like, it's so worth it. And even if you're so nervous, like, just do it.
yeah.
Well, there's a reason that you're nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you need to walk towards that
Yeah, it's like that
and
that
investigate.
fear of vulnerability. But
Right.
if you really step into that after a couple times, then it's just you're on a great playing field. You guys know each other and know everything about each other, and then you can just step into like, okay, now help. Now where do we go? What do we do? Yeah.
Now, I just heard the podcast where you guys have a friend who has
Yeah.
a child with autism. How has that affected your friendship with them?
Yeah, so Seth and Melanie do our podcast. They're
fabulous,
They are
by the way.
awesome.
They-
We love
yeah, I
them,
love
and they have a crazy story. Being family and marriage, practice licensed people, counselors, but then having to walk through their own story of a really, really hard marriage, domestic violence, all these different things, and then 12 years in, I think, found redemption. Wow. So they live in Seattle. We live in Hawaii, so we don't have a ton of time with them, but we just have known them from kind of mutual friends, and then met them when we were back in there in the same church and stuff. But yeah, they're awesome, and I think I don't just think of them, but then we have another friend in Nashville who has a child with Down syndrome, and just we have some friends that I think just so beautifully and faithfully walk through the tender love of Jesus and grace, and just representing him so well and being that aroma of Christ. And you have such a beautiful opportunity to do that through children, but also children maybe with some type of disability or more hardship, because it's hard and exhausting, and you see it in them, and you see it, but they pour themselves out and they sacrifice and they love, and so yeah, it's beautiful.
Which is exactly what you just were talking about. It's seeing their behavior and going, oh my gosh,
that
okay, I need to
profoundly
step up
impacts
my
me.
game
Totally, yeah,
big time.
It profoundly impacts us to see marriages like that, and with more difficult situations and stuff like that, and them still be so faithful, so loving, and so kind, and yeah.
Because sometimes you don't really want to be very nice.
Yes. Totally.
Not you guys, but I mean.
Well, me for sure. I don't know about that.
Now, you talk a lot about prayer and about waiting and about the benefit of that, because it can feel so non-beneficial. A lot of times we're like, okay, Lord, so I trust you, and so my request is this, this, and this. And when that doesn't pan out, it's like, what'd you do, Lord?
Yeah.
Well, how about what did I not do? I didn't wait.
Yeah.
Talk about that discipline and how it involves, how it affects your life and your marriage.
Yeah, well, in the book, I particularly talked about that with singleness and waiting for someone to pursue you or to have a boyfriend or marriage. But I think no matter who you are or what season of life you are in, we're all waiting. We're always in a season of waiting, whether it's a dream you have or a child that you're longing for or a house, whatever it is, all these different things, we're always waiting, and or someone that you know to come to salvation or all these things. And I think it's funny because in the scriptures, like in the Psalms especially, there's so many verses about waiting on the Lord. And especially in this culture, in this era, we don't like to wait. Like, we get Amazon Prime and it's here in an hour in Seattle.
Right.
It's quick
Literally,
and
it's
we're not.
mind-blowing.
Yeah, or you send a text to someone, if they haven't texted you back in an hour, you're like, oh, they hate me. You know, like, yeah, you're like.
It's like, no, my phone was off. I was camping. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually spending quality time with my kids.
I was actually with other humans.
Exactly.
And so I feel like waiting is this anomaly. Is that the right word?
Yeah, it's just hard. Yeah, it's something that's we're even losing more and more.
Yeah, and the Lord talks a lot about it, and I think waiting really is an opportunity to trust the Lord.
Yeah.
And to know that when you are waiting and you are praying, one, it's a call to prayer, like to talk with the Lord, and a lot of times we may not see the prayer answered right away, and that's okay. And it's like the Lord saying, I know, but I just want to be with you. Like, I just want you to keep coming to me, keep talking, let's keep working this out.
Right.
I just love being with you as my child. And so it's an opportunity to do that. And then also opportunity to trust the Lord. Like, here's all these promises laid out for you in Scripture. When you don't get what you want at the time that you want it, do you really believe that the Lord is good? Do you really believe that He is for you? Do you really believe He hears you? That He knows what's best? All these things that He promises, it's like, you know it in the Scripture, but then when you're actually waiting, it's like, okay, God, this is the groundwork I'm doing. Do I really believe you? And it can be really, really, really hard, where sometimes you are just on your knees in your room for hours every week asking the Lord, but then to know that at the end of the day, even if you never get what you want, you get Jesus, and you get to know Him so much better and it's such more real life. Whatever it is, whether it's loneliness or all these things. So the beauty of that, I think, that's where the treasure is, and that's where the fruit is.
And waiting also allows stuff to bubble up in us. So
Totally.
when we're not, when He doesn't, answer in the next 10 seconds, it's like, why am I so impatient?
Yeah, exactly. It kind of creates that,
And we run from that sometimes because He's like, I'm not answering because you have this character issue that's obviously blaring.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm dealing with that.
Yeah.
And I want you to come to me with it, and let's figure out how we can do this. But we get so distracted in this world.
Yeah.
Now you guys have a practice which I think is fabulous, and it is no electronics, the Sabbath. You have talk about that, because that's the best video I saw.
Yeah, it sounds like we're Amish, especially being under 30.
No, but it was so cool.
Yeah,
you had so much fun with it.
Totally, and I think for us that was specifically again sparked on by some mentors of ours who just live within really beautiful family rhythms where they do these things during the week. They do a Sabbath.
Which, can I interrupt you for a sec? I think in our culture we don't like to have rhythms. We think we can just press on and do whatever we need to do and go, 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 go. But God is a God of rhythm, and He's created the universe with rhythms, day and night, and then our bodies have natural rhythms. So when you create rhythms in your family and in your marriage,
it's structure.
They're really life-giving.
Well, we don't. Yeah, that's a side note. We don't realize how much God created the world with like an actual cadence and a rhythm that you have to submit to for flourishing, right? Like the day and the night is a huge one. With you, try to not submit to sleep, and you'll die. Like, you know, like.
Or you'll be really hard to be around.
Exactly. I mean,
or
think
you'll
about.
get these disorders.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about like, you know, an average person sleeps 8 hours a day and there's 24 hours in a day. On average, if you live for 90 years, that means you completely slept for 30 years of your life. That's crazy. It shows you also how unneeded we are really in this world.
And it shows me how much I want to go to sleep.
I know, same. But just like whether it's sleep or even like, but in the West, we are, you know, in the day and the night, but in the weeks and the years and the seasons, even with agriculture, like God created there to be rhythm, and you have to submit to that, or else you can even take the agricultural metaphor, like, or else you're gonna just tax the ground. Like if you just keep tilling the soil, you don't let it rest, you don't let it lay fallow, you know, and all these different things. And I think that is just like our souls and just like our spirits. And we in the West are we're one of the first societies that we don't realize it, but we're trying to be very God-like in the sense of like, we don't need to submit to rhythm. You know, like we can actually totally usurp and completely ignore the natural rhythms of the universe. Even small stuff like take. I mean, it's a huge blessing, but take like light, like literal artificial light. That was something that was an innovation that was great, but at the end of the day is also like we don't go to bed when it gets dark.
There's time to turn them off.
Exactly. Or like when we basically, I remember when we went to Uganda and how beautiful and amazing it was that like. You wake up at 5 a.m. because the sun just came up, and you go to bed at 6 p.m. because the sun just went down. Like you can't see anything.
Do anything.
You literally can't see anything once it, like, you know. And there's stuff like that of like just we're able to like usurp it in the West because of innovation and technology and kind of these things that are awesome as image bearers that we've done. But then all that to say, so then we started going back to the scripture and say, man, what are some of these things that God kind of really wanted to put on the DNA of humans and societies and culture? Just mainly what rhythm does is we kind of talk about these two things. There's rhythm and vision, I think, for a family. Every family and marriage has to have a really healthy vision and then a really healthy rhythm. And the vision is like, what are you called to? What's your mission for your... Think about how well businesses do that, which I talk about in the book too. Like businesses have mission statements. They got vision statements. They have quarterly meetings. They have end of the year parties. They celebrate the employee of the week. They do all like, you do these things that like, we're going somewhere. And you got to have structure, you got to have vision, you got to have purpose.
Stephen Covey was great about talking about that.
And you got to have that. And a lot of families don't. I don't know what we're doing. It just, we react. We react to our whole life rather than be proactive. But then what rhythm is it's the tool to serve the vision. So once you come up with the vision of like what God wants to do for your family and in your marriage and what purpose he has for you, then rhythms are the way so you don't burn out on that. It's like, how can we make it so this is very sustainable? And so Sabbath is one of those things we do, long story short, where it's not the only thing we do, but it's one of those things we do where we weekly believe that God set up the world to work in weeks. And so it's, you know, the 6 days of work, and then we rest and we stop and we cease, which is what, you know, the word Shabbat in Hebrew literally means. It means to cease and stop. Totally.
Were you singing it on there?
Yeah. And so and it's fun because
and you make it fun. It's not like, oh my gosh, here we go again.
Yeah,
we gotta have it silent.
This is the biggest.
It's like a party at the end of every week.
This is that's the biggest misconception when you start talking about these things that we get really frustrated by especially with our peers that they don't get is like it's not. They see it as this religious activity to just be bored and stop and see, and it's like. Scripturally, especially, you know, if you even like us having spent time in Jerusalem, you know, even with, you know, Jewish people today, it literally is a party. And so
it totally is. And the Father speaks blessings into every member of the family.
There's this patriarch who kind of presides over this. It reminds me of almost like a mini wedding. It's like this father stands up and has this speech and it presides over this ceremony, and then you throw a party, and that's or another way to put it is holiday, which is literally where we get that word comes from, holy days, which is the feasts and the Shabbat and all these things. So they're all connected. And so for us, we cease, we stop, and the best way it started giving us life when we said, what can we do once a week that literally feels like we're throwing a party for our family.
Or that gives us life.
Yeah.
Because it's like a soul rest.
Yeah.
It's not like your day off where you run all these errands.
That's actually anti-Sabbath. Like
Yes.
when you get to
And
the
when I read that, I was like, why did you have to say that? Because that's when I do all my
But when you
errands.
actually get to the definition of the word, that is actually anti-Sabbath. It's like, you know, for me, errand, like all that's like the busybodying of like, I'm going to go, because I do have that day and it stinks. I got to go to the post office. I got to go do the bill. I got to go this.
All the laundry, all the grocery shopping.
So rest, what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah.
I think it's what you talk about, filling and soul rest. And,
yeah, so I think it's different for every family, and sometimes
Well, that's
maybe
the fun
you can
part.
only do 4 hours on Saturday morning wherever your family is, but for us, we do Sunday dinner time all the way till Monday dinner time.
Okay.
So I try to get all the shopping, all the laundry done before dinner, and then we have a big dinner, and sometimes it could be takeout, or it could be soup, or it could be Jeff makes something, but we have a special dinner. our kids light candles. We sing a song.
So cute, yeah.
Jeff gives a blessing.
Yeah, I think interjecting a ritual aspect to
Yeah.
it is really healthy too. Of like doing something that's similar to mark the day.
And there's something to be said about, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but to be said about just our physiological makeup.
Exactly.
Again,
Yeah.
that touches into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jeff will be like, Kinsley, I saw you do this week. I'm so proud of you. Or I've seen you grow in this area.
Yeah, I usually pick one thing for each kid that I saw like in that week.
Yeah. And then we pray, we eat, we play. So maybe we'll go walk on the beach or we'll do Legos or something.
Or you'll go to that lanai and you'll try to get on that swing where other people are.
That's right. That's right. But it's like, what's just the most fun, restful, filling day?
And it'll change with your family and what time you can do it. But then we put the kids' bed early. And then the next day we do something life-giving. So for us, we've realized...
we kind of have a date night that night because our phones are off and stuff like that.
We turn off our phones, so it's just us.
No electronics, 24 hours.
Well, I have my phone on.
But see, and this is a good point. So, because she's like a grandma on social media where it doesn't matter to her. So it's like we don't get really religious about it. Like for me, it's my job. I'm on emails, I'm on Twitter, I'm on social media.
Right.
So I need that day of technological disconnect to feel filled. When for her, she doesn't. And so, but yeah, we don't, like my iPad's off, my iPhone's off, and you can just tell it's a totally different day in the home because I'm not on all that stuff.
Totally present.
Well, it's counting for its deep work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which I love that book.
Or The Power of Habit, also with Duhigg. He's great.
I love Cal Newport, by the way.
Yeah.
But and so it's like we usually read, hang out, connect, have a date night.
Go to bed early, and then the next day we realize for us what gives us the most life is going outside.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe we'll go to the park with the kids. We'll go swimming. We'll go hiking, whatever it is, or just out to breakfast, and then we take naps. Yeah, and that's it. But it's like so life-giving.
It's a day marker every week that just stops us, resets us. And I don't talk about it in this book, but I talk about it in It's Not What You Think, where the beautiful thing that helped us too is Sabbath is the beginning of the week, not the end of the week. Because sometimes you'll work for the weekend.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and then I'm so tired, and then okay, When in reality,
I have to go to work on Monday. I hate my life.
If you can reset, or reframe your mind to think that no, this is actually the opportunity to fill the tank to go forward.
This is the first day of the week.
Yeah, and I use the analogy, and it's not what you think of, or not the analogy, the scripture of in Genesis, Adam. So there's two perspectives in Genesis. There's the perspective of God and the perspective of Adam. From God's perspective, the Sabbath was the last day. He worked and he worked and he worked, and then he rested, and there was this beautiful Sabbath on the day of rest. But from Adam's perspective, the day of rest was the first day, right? Like he was created on the last day of work. So the minute Adam opened his eyes, it's day 7 and it's the day of rest. That's the first day he entered into.
Can you imagine what that was like?
Yeah, it's just like awesome. But and imagine how from his perspective, he had no context to even know that there was probably 6 days behind him. Like it was just the first day was a day of rest. And God had done all the stuff that was necessary. And I think that when you realize that, it's really life-giving too, because then you can enter into rest and then work properly and healthily from there. And so,
have you ever not wanted to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Me, no, her, yes. Yeah, no, she resisted for a couple years.
I never ever did that. And I feel like in college it was impossible. I was like, I have homework every day.
Right. And then I started reading all these like dead Jewish writers, and I was like, I think there's something
second
here.
year of
Old
marriage.
books is great.
Yeah.
But I was like, I had just had a baby, and I was like, that doesn't sound fun to me. I don't understand how, as a young mom,
the baby's
I
not
can
be
have
chilling,
a day of, like, I'm going to be doing the exact same thing I do every day. I'm going to change diapers, I'm going to be cooking, I'm going to do all this stuff. And so Jeff would sit there, bless his heart, and just read.
It's okay, because I was going to ask you about this because I know where you're going.
Yeah, I'm like, this is amazing. That's my best day ever.
His best day is to just read a book, which I love, and I love reading too. But he would just read, and I would still be doing everything.
Right.
I'm like, I do not like this.
Yeah.
And so it was really hard.
Of course you liked it, Jeff.
Yeah, I know, right?
So for 2 years, I really fought against it. And we traveled so much, so it was never consistent either. It wasn't like the same day every week. And then after we had our son, when we started to implement it again, I was like, why? This is amazing. And like every week I would crave it because I just needed that time to just rest, to have it be different. And I think it ended up where we learned how to do it together.
Yeah, what fills us both up, what fills the family up.
Yeah, so now I try to get done all my stuff before Sabbath, and then also Jeff a lot of the times will
I try to take more of the day
meals.
Responsibilities. I'll try to make the meal that day. I'll try to make breakfast. I'll try to do things
or we'll go out.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, to me, that's not, sometimes it's fun, but a lot of times it feels like work.
I'll try to take care of the kids even a little bit more that day or whatever. Just something that feels like it gives her the day.
Or as long as we're connecting, where it's not just like we're doing our individual stuff all day, but at one point we're all together doing something I'm like, this is the best. Like, I just feel so filled up. Our kids love it. Every time they're like, Shabbat, they're so excited.
They were adorable. Yeah, you guys have to watch the video on the Sabbath. It was so good.
I think that's a point, too, of like when you make something, and here's a point even from a parenting standpoint that I like to say is like, I feel like we're very intentional in making it like a holiday every week because I want, you know, God forbid our kids ever have a huge wayward season where they just say no to the Lord and want to walk away from Him and maybe us. But if they do, I want their Mondays to be the worst days ever and be kind of depressed about it because it was so awesome when they were walking in
out of that rhythm.
You know what I mean? Like I don't want it to be like, oh man, I'm so glad I'm away from that rigid thing, and more like, oh man, I'm lonely now and I don't get to celebrate that you know, like I want it to be so fun that they actually miss it, even if they have that wayward and not even that necessarily that, but just all the family traditions, all the things, all the DNA. You want to interject life into it, so if they do walk away from it, they almost have this tug of that's where joy really was, you know, not like rigidity and all these different things. And I think talking about the Sabbath, it's a good microcosm of all of family and all of marriage, of like, it takes work to learn yourself.
Yeah,
and it
give
takes
a lot
years.
of grace because it takes a while to figure out what do we, the Bethkes, love doing.
And I think every family has to ask that. What are traditions we want to do? What are rhythms we want to do? What do we want to put into this? And then mainly with that aspect of kind of holiday and fun and something that they look back on with fond memories, like a Christmas, you know, or something like that. And and I even think of Christmas, you know, like that's another tradition we learn of, like, I think, you know, 2 years ago or whatever, I remember Kinsley didn't get that many gifts, but then she was still very overwhelmed opening them, you know, because she's like a 1-year-old and it's like 4 gifts from the grandparents and all these things, and it's overwhelming. They want to open the next one, they don't appreciate this one. So then we said, okay, we're done with that. Next year we're gonna do like a 7-day opening scale, you know, or 1 day, you know, like
very cool.
Yeah, it's like so then it slows it down.
Because you still get all the presents from the grandparents and aunts, uncles.
But that's that's a great idea.
But it's just little stuff like that where you have to like observe and then like change, observe and change and adapt. And when you do that,
they grow and
totally.
You change,
but when you do that in your marriage and your family, I think it really gives life.
Now, how do you guys, because one of the most essential parts of marriage is honoring each other's needs. But before you can honor them, you have to have communicated them, because believe it or not, none of us are mind readers. And so
I think I've heard that quote before. I probably say that once a week.
So, like, what I've said to my kids or my husband is, I can't know unless you tell me. So, and a lot of times we don't know. You know,
Totally.
A therapist told me once, Colleen, we all know what you don't want.
Yeah.
What do you want? I'm like, oh, that's a totally different question.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how do you come up with that? I mean, how have you each communicated, these are my needs?
Well, you talk about that, because I don't have a problem communicating my needs at all.
You're kidding. I would have never thought.
I know, so I don't, but that is something we've had to walk through because, and I think we've actually gotten to a really good place with it, but you talk about that, because I feel like, it's like I always will say that, I'm like, yeah, just you talk about it. You talk about it.
I think it is really, okay, for me it's been hard because I just thought, like, I think subconsciously I thought, he should know me. He should know me.
A lot.
So he should know what I want.
Or that if I don't, it's a sign of me not
caring.
You're dismissing her.
Exactly.
Remember, it was thoughtful forever.
Thoughtful, yeah.
And we had this long conversation. He's like, I'm just so thoughtful.
Yeah.
So I think it takes time. And I think not just time, but like,
you had to like learn yourself.
I had to learn I'm still learning
crucial.
myself.
Yeah.
That's crucial.
And I'm still learning it, but being able to learn, like, I can tell him what I want. That's okay.
You don't have to feel bad or guilty.
He
or,
loves you.
Yeah.
I want to hear it.
Like, especially as a young mom, any young moms out there, like, say, I need a break.
Which that
once
was
a week.
Yeah.
Like,
that was the biggest one, because we would get to the point where she'd be crying or burned out and just be like, I need a break. And when just like, you gotta tell me that like 3 days before. You know, you gotta tell me before the crying
moment. Not when I'm
moment.
sitting here with my great old book that I'm like investing.
Exactly. It's like you gotta tell me that before it gets to the breakdown moment.
I think most husbands want to
I just had no idea.
give you exactly what you want and to help you and to serve you.
There's joy in generosity.
There's so much, he wants to do whatever serves me.
But we're also
but
idiots,
if he
and I was
doesn't
oblivious.
know, but my problem as a young mom was, no, I just felt so guilty if I needed a break. I'm loving the kids. I feel guilty if I need a break. And then I would go until I just broke down. And I'm like, oh, now I'm realizing once a week I just need to have a break. So now it's at the beginning of the week. Hey, when is a time this week where I can get away and just have me time? So I think learning to do that. But even a couple weeks ago, we were in our small group watching a video about how men and women think and what they want, and it was like enlightening because all of a sudden we were like, oh, I didn't realize that's how you worked. Or I didn't realize that's how I work. Because for instance, all women want to know that they're lovable.
Most women,
Most women, that they are lovable. And so,
His Needs, Her Needs is a great book too by Willard F.
Yeah,
Kelly.
yeah.
Fantastic book on that.
Yes. And so, I'll try to get all this right. But we would get in some conflicts sometimes where I would feel just like he doesn't love me. Like I would just think that, in this moment, he doesn't want me. He's not thinking of me.
Our minds are not our best friends a lot.
No, it's not at all.
But then as a guy,
and Jeff would
I have
be
a little more like longer picture of like, oh, I've been showing you that for like 5 years. Like even if you don't feel that in this moment, take from that emotional bank. I always say,
He's like, your love tank should be so full that I shouldn't have to do that. Like you should be able to bank on what I've done.
Yeah, I always use this dumb analogy.
Right? No, it's
like,
the deposits.
I was like, if you don't feel right now, withdraw from the bank that I have deposited in over 5 years.
The savings account's empty.
Exactly. That's what she'd say.
But she was saying how most women, we need it every day.
Like every
So it's just how we're wired. Every day we wake up, we need to be reminded, I'm lovable. Like he wants me. And so when we learned that, it was like this light bulb moment. And because I didn't even know that about myself, I just knew I'm feeling this about every time, about 5 o'clock every day. I'm feeling if I haven't been filled up in that way. And now I finally realize, oh, this is just how I'm wired. Totally. This is how I work. And same with him with respect and just wanting to be thanked for things or not be
the 5 love languages.
Second guess a ton.
Second guess a ton. So I think anyway, all that to say,
you need to know yourself.
You need to know yourself and then each other and be able to communicate that. But we're still learning that 5 years in. Like we're still getting...
And you also change as humans. So like her needs change. My needs change.
And I love that you noted that we're not the same as we were like yesterday.
Yeah, that's like my favorite quote from that. I think it was like a seminary president where he said something like, I've been married 7 times, all to the same woman. Because it's just like, it's a different person, and see them like every 10 years or 5 years or whatever it was.
But as families and then as a church, we need to remember transformation is a process.
And it's actually a blessing.
It is.
We want you to transform, not
Thankfully,
stay the same.
I'm not who I was 10 years ago and 5 years ago and last week.
Yeah.
Now, we could talk all day long, but... As we close,
we're only on chapter 1.
Well, I know, and there's so many more things. But you guys will just have to come back.
Yes.
Or I'll go out to Hawaii, and then we can do it together.
Deal.
The team would want to do that.
Deal.
Just talk to the audience about what it is to be united in marriage, and give them hope, because there's some watching who are in a domestically abusive relationship or who have been betrayed by a mentor, and they don't want to trust. Just speak life into where they are.
Preach it, babe.
That's the first time I think you've been with that word.
I was going to see if she was going to go first. I think, I alluded to it in the beginning, but one encouragement I always like to give people is take advantage of the power of covenant marriage. So many times we make marriages out to be contract marriages, right? Where it's the difference between a covenant and a contract is those are the only 2 human relationships in all of life. Contract relationships are about the behavior, not the promise. So it's like the behavior is stronger than the promise, right? Like if the behavior is bad enough, then the promise is broken. And then covenant is the exact opposite, where the promise is stronger than the behavior. Now, of course, there's extenuating circumstances, and of course, there's exceptions. But when you can understand that the power of marriage is that God made it a covenant, not a contract. So you can be fully naked in that metaphorical sense of vulnerability. And then what happens is if you can walk that path with Jesus first, and recognize that he sees all that you are. He sees all your shortcomings and failures, and he says, I still want you. I'm not going anywhere, and the promise is stronger. Then you personally can take the mask off. You personally can say, oh, okay, then this is who I am. I'm not ashamed to say it. I can be vulnerable. I can be honest. And then that lets you live in that power more, and then you just feel so free and you feel so known. Because the worst thing is to, I think it was Keller again who said, like, to be fully known but not fully loved is rejection, and to be fully loved but not fully known, you can always buy the lie of just like, oh, well, they don't know the true me. Right. So it's like you gotta have fully known and fully loved for that joy to happen. And so you can know that. God created marriage to be like that, and it's a long journey, but spouses on that journey, once you've had it and found it, you go, oh yes, this is what he created to be. But then specifically to people who maybe are in a situation who say, yeah, but my husband or my wife, has betrayed me or hurt me or something like that. I think there's a million different circumstances. So if it's very serious, get help, find professional help, find counseling, find resources specifically tailored to the environment you're going through. And the main thing is you're not alone. I think a lot of times especially in seasons of hard things of marriage, you kind of feel this crawl into the hole mentality of just like, I can't tell people, I can't be honest, I can't share.
Well, because a lot of times they're rejected in the church.
Totally. And that's hard, is that I think it's back to that covenant thing again of, sadly, humans will fail us, and they will reject us, and they will let the behavior be stronger than the promise.
You don't know anything about that with all the criticism you've had.
Yeah, seriously, right? Yeah, just a few. I mean, thankfully it's not as heavy as it used to be, but yeah, 5 years ago was a fun year. But I think, but the thing you can rest on, even when humans reject you or are not honoring you, is that Jesus never does, and that he gives you that covenant of, hey, I'm with you, I'm beside you, I'm for you, you're known, you're seen, and you're not alone. And I think that is at least the first step, and that is the path of freedom, getting your joy back, getting your humanness back. Because like I alluded to again earlier with the words, one of the hardest things in a more abusive or hard marriage is you start to actually buy the lie that you're not good enough, and that you are damaged, and that there's something wrong with you, and you do any research on those situations and domestic violence or abusive relationships, and you realize that you almost get in this like, you start going crazy of thinking that it's your fault.
Well, because you're told it's your fault.
Exactly. And this cycle of shame and stuff and of self-talk of it's your fault needs to be broken. And I think it can only be broken by the voice of Jesus, that Jesus' voice is more powerful than your spouse's voice if it's in an unhealthy situation. And you can rest in that and sit in that. But yeah, that's what I think of, and hopefully that's an encouragement to whoever's watching.
Alyssa, do you have anything?
Amen.
Amen.
I love it.
But no, seriously, thank you so much for having us. This was an absolute blast. And yeah, we need to come back because we could talk about this stuff and with you for days and hours and times.
Yeah, write another book and come back.
Seriously, deal.
Well, okay, so the book right here, and I like two little people on here.
I know, it looks like us, right?
That was the point. And the podcast is also so good. I'm a big podcaster.
Yes.
Love That Lasts. Get the book, whatever age you are, because you do breathe energy and life into someone's heart, which is so crucial for wanting to become motivated, and even for marriages who've been around for 40 years. Yeah, it's helpful to hear. Yeah,
well, that means a lot because we want to hear from the 40-year-old marriages. But I do think that is cool to hear. And then also on top of that, I think it can be a good. We've seen it be a good resource already for maybe people who've been married 40 years but have kids have adult kids they're maybe having a tough time relating to, or just wanting to understand their kid's adult relationship. And so that's been a fun resource too, of kind of bridging the gap between parent and adult kid.
Now, on your podcast, there's a call-in. So you do a lot of, and I love it because you're like, love you guys, thank you.
It's awesome.
So how can they get a hold of you?
So yeah, jeffanalyssa.com is our main website, or lovethatlasts.co is kind of the book resource stuff.
.co.
I know.
Not com.
Not com. But if you go to either of those, all our stuff's on there. Social media, podcasts, videos, books, all that stuff. And yeah, we do a fun thing on the podcast where people can call us, leave a voicemail, and then we'll play the voicemail and answer it.
Yeah,
so
that's fun.
We love it. And we love anyone who reads our stuff, watches our stuff. It's a blessing. We don't take it for granted, and it's really fun that we get to do this. So.
Well, there you have it, the Bethkes. Thank you guys so much for being here.
It was a blast.
Certainly enjoy it. And as always with Reframing Ministries, please contact Insight for a Living if you are stuck or feeling frustrated or have a question. Whatever it is that you're going through, we are here to help you. And pulling these guys in to also be a voice into your life is great. So have a great day. Thank you so much, you guys.